That's my neighbor in the back. I suffered through 4 hours of oral arguments in the Michael Flynn case yesterday. At the very least, I'm going to make a recap vlog about it. Viva Frei, Montreal litigator turned YouTuber, and yesterday, August 11th, were the oral arguments in the Michael Flynn case subsequent to Judge Sullivan's petition for rehearing en banc before the full bench in the DC Court of Appeals. Based on the August 5th court order, which I covered in a previous vlog, which I will link right here, the oral arguments were scheduled for 1 hour, 20 minutes per party before the court. The full hearing lasted just shy of 4 full hours, and I actually did a live stream reaction with fellow YouTube lawyer Nate Brody on fellow YouTube lawyer Uncivil Law's channel, where we were watching in real time, reacting in real time for 4 hours.
2 hours and 10 minutes ago.
The district court's ruling on a dispositive motion. No, I don't think that's the rule, and I think In re Reagan makes that clear. There can be lack of action that tantamount to an action.
Lack of action can be action, yes, which I would count on. The lack of a live omission can be a lie.
Totally.
Hello, Viva kids.
Conduct outside the clear.
Do you have an opinion on any of this?
Law of the circuit, there could be, and of course that.
And the 4-hour ordeal brought back a very distinct memory from childhood. Growing up, my father always would call my mother at about 4 o'clock from court saying, "We're almost done here, I'll be back in an hour," and he would be back by 8 o'clock. My experience at court is that it's always a question of hurry up and wait. You know things are going to take longer than the scheduled time, but when something is scheduled for 1 hour, you don't expect it to last 4 full hours. Now, I jokingly say that I'm still recovering, but there is truth in jest. Sitting through a full 4-hour court hearing is intellectual exercise. Doing a 4-hour reaction live stream is double exercise. You're paying attention to what's going on, you're taking notes, you're reading the chat, and you're trying to react to what is being said. Now, I suffered through the full 4-hour hearing, so you don't have to, and I figured I'm going to do a condensed vlog summary of my observations of those oral arguments. Now, my first 30,000-foot overview observation is that this more resembled a congressional hearing than a court hearing. Now, admittedly, full disclosure, I have never pleaded law in the United States of America. I have never pleaded before the Supreme Court of Canada, but I have pleaded before the Court of Appeal multiple times, and I've pleaded before the Superior Court extensively, and very rarely do you have such a clear indication of where the judge sits positionally when they start asking questions. Listening to the questions the judges asked, the manner in which they asked the questions, the manner in which they exchanged with the attorneys, it was clear from the beginning which way they leaned, and overtly so, and it was kind of surprising, actually. As far as my impression of the performance of the attorneys is concerned, and I'll substantiate this a little more later on, Sidney Powell was pretty good, but I found her written pleadings to be stronger than her oral pleadings. Jeffrey Wall, representing the United States, was phenomenal. He took a grilling from a lot of the judges, and he really had very, very good answers to those hard questions. And as much as it might pain me to say it, Beth Wilkinson, representing Judge Sullivan, did a phenomenal job as well. In my humble opinion, I think she had the easiest position to present before that particular panel of judges, but she did an amazing job. Now, the one thing that I found truly astonishing, and not at all in a good way, was the excessive use of hypotheticals by the court, and I said as much on Twitter immediately after the hearing. We had hypotheticals of congressional spending, nuns carrying briefcases full of cash and bribery. We had so many hypotheticals, I was wondering why the court just didn't stick with the actual case.
Referring Judge Wilkins hypothetical about information coming in from a busload of nuns who have seen a suitcase of money pass from a defendant to a AUSA.
Now, I've said it before and I'll say it again, although I'm sometimes guilty of doing it myself, and when I do, it usually comes back to bite me in the butt, but there's no point arguing from imperfect hypotheticals when you have a perfect example, that being the case at hand. During the oral arguments, the court was bringing up hypotheticals of congressional spending, nuns carrying briefcases full of cash for the purposes of bribing the prosecutor, for the purposes of illustrating what are the limitations of the judicial leave required when granting a Rule 48A dismissal. The ultimate underlying point of the reductio ad absurdum of an analogy being that if the judge had actual concrete evidence of corruption or bribery that would account for why the Department of Justice had made a motion to dismiss under a Rule 48A, would the court have the authority to refuse to grant that dismissal under the Rule 48A? It seemed to be accepted law among the parties that the court could in fact refuse to grant a 48A dismissal in the event of prosecutorial harassment. The question was whether or not the court could also refuse to grant a 48A dismissal if they were faced with evidence that the Department of Justice's decision to make the motion to dismiss was itself the result of corruption or bribery. Hence the absurd hypothetical of the judge or someone actually witnessing the defendant paying off the prosecutor to drop the charges. The judges put this hypothetical to both Sidney Powell and Jeffrey Wall, and the answer of Sidney Powell and Jeffrey Wall was, in a nutshell, no. There would be other channels for that type of corruption, but the refusal to grant the motion to dismiss would not be one of them. And here's my problem about arguing from such imperfect hypotheticals. If there were, in fact, that hypothetical of a nun carrying a briefcase full of cash paying off the prosecutor, there would be so many other things going on in that story that it wouldn't be a question of a Rule 48A dismissal. You would have scandalous articles in newspapers. newspapers. You would have law enforcement getting involved. You would have politicians getting involved. You'd probably have the prosecutor in that case pulled, have a new one appointed who would make proper, uncorrupt decisions in that court file. To make any arguments off these extreme, oversimplified, and absolutely implausible hypotheticals does nothing but distract from the actual issues. And it is admittedly always easy to play the Monday morning lawyer back, but if I were the lawyer in that file, I would have pushed back a little harder against the court. I would have said, look, I hate arguing from these hyperbolic hypotheticals that are totally oversimplified and exaggerated to the point of being destructive and not productive, but let me push your hypothetical one step further. Following your hypothetical, what would the judge in fact get to do? Would the judge get to refuse to grant the dismissal under the Rule 48A? Okay, what then? Does the judge get to order the prosecutor to continue the prosecution under penalty of contempt of court? Does the judge get to appoint his or her own prosecutor to be substituted for the former corrupt prosecutor? Does the judge get to usurp all of the powers of the executive branch, notwithstanding the fact that he or she is part of the judicial branch? The bottom line would be that yes, the judge actually does not get to refuse to grant the dismissal under the Rule 48A because the proper remedy to that problem is not a judicial one, it is a political one. The court pushed the issue as to whether or not Judge Sullivan had in fact decided anything that would justify the issuance of a writ of mandamus. It's the old argument that we've seen from before that Judge Emmett Sullivan hasn't in fact decided anything. He hasn't adjudicated on the Department of Justice's motion to dismiss. We don't know how he's going to decide on that motion, such that the issuance of a mandamus is inappropriate at this time. To which Jeffrey Wall had two good responses. The first of which was, look, the writing is on the wall. Judge Emmett Sullivan and Judge Gleeson have already announced what they intend to do, and that is basically open up an investigation into the executive's decision to drop the charges, and that is a violation of the separation of powers. And the other argument was that even probing the executive's decisions as to the motivations behind dropping the charges is itself a violation of the separation of powers and creates the precedent where the judges now can test every decision by the executive. But the more interesting discussion on this point came when they asked the question of Beth Wilkinson, and as far as I'm concerned, she made a rather serious judicial admission that no one seemed to have pounced on.
Well, again, there's a presumption that the district court will do its job and follow the law. So yes, I think generally there would be little or no basis for mandamus for a district court judge who's scheduling a hearing. But as Judge Srinivasan asked me, could there be something that happened even in the order for that hearing that suggested totally improper conduct outside the clear, law of this circuit? There could be, and of course that could be a basis for mandamus.
In her response to the same line of questioning, Beth Wilkinson admitted that inaction was tantamount to action for the purposes of issuing a mandamus, such that even if the judge didn't actively decide anything, the failure to decide something could itself be subject to a mandamus.
There can be lack of action that's tantamount to an action.
There can be lack of action that's tantamount to an action.
That subtle admission seems to put an end to the tired argument that Judge Emmett Sullivan hasn't decided anything yet, such that the issuance of a mandamus is premature. With that statement, Beth Wilkinson has seemingly admitted that merely by virtue of the fact that Judge Emmett Sullivan has not decided anything yet, it could be subject to the issuance of a writ of mandamus. And that is exactly what I've been saying from the very beginning. Everything Judge Emmett Sullivan says he wants to do, he could have done in the absence of appointing an amicus. He could have done it in the absence of scheduling additional hearing. He could have just scheduled a hearing date on the Department of Justice's motion to dismiss and asked all the questions he had in his mind. And that is why I originally predicted that the Court of Appeal was just going to send it back down to Sullivan with a scathing decision, not telling him what to do, but indicating quite clearly what he should do ASAP. My prediction, and I'm crossing my fingers I'm right because I'm going to look so smart in hindsight, is that the Court of Appeal is going to say, this is all fine and well, Judge Sullivan. You can do this on your own in the absence of an amicus. You have meticulously laid out all the questions that can be asked on the Department of Justice's motion to dismiss, and you have the authority to ask them, so go ahead and ask them. You didn't need to unilaterally appoint an amicus. You didn't need to create a schedule that would add additional months to a matter that has already been going on for years. You already have the requisite authority to ask all of the questions you outlined in your argument brief. Go ahead and ask them, render a decision on the Department of Justice's motion to dismiss, and if people don't like that decision, they will appeal it. But what you've decided to do, above and beyond defying a Supreme Court precedent, has just created a big, ugly mess. And that is the summary. I just saved you 4 hours of your life if you don't actually want to go watch the entire thing. But I've got to say, and maybe I say this as a cynical lawyer who got tired of the profession, I think anybody having watched that would lose a lot of faith in the judicial system. I have never seen a gong show. I actually don't know what a gong show is. I only know how the expression is used, and that seemed to have been a gong show. Hours of loaded questions, outlandish hypotheticals by judges who you know what they've already decided before they put pen to paper. I think anybody having listened to that would come away thinking that that sounded more like a congressional hearing than a judicial hearing, and that is not a good look for the court to have in this era. You know what? I almost forgot the most important thing. It seems to be accepted even among all the counsel to the parties that whatever power the court has under a Rule 48A, that power does not include second-guessing the prosecutorial decisions.
Of course, the court cannot second-guess the prosecutorial decision made by the government. So it would be fact-specific, but it certainly doesn't include second-guessing the prosecutorial decisions.
So Wilkinson is basically admitting that even if this gets referred back to Sullivan or any other judge, they have minimal powers under the 48A to refuse to grant the Department of Justice's motion to dismiss. So what's the point in sending it back in the first place? All right, one of the judges asked that very same question, but obviously in a much less hyperactive manner, but whatever. That is the most important thing of all of this. Basically, all of the lawyers agree that the judge has minimal powers to refuse under the Rule 48A, if any such powers at all exist in the first place. Back to the end of the video now. And with that said, if you found this summary useful and you like my videos and content, please be sure to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, drop a comment in the comment section below because it feeds the algorithm. If you want to support the channel, all of these support links are in the pinned comment. We've got Patreon, Subscribestar, PayPal, YouTube membership, merch. We got merch. I've got a podcast with Robert Barnes called Viva and Barnes, Law for the People. Check it out, download it if you haven't already done that. But more important than all of that, take care of yourselves, check in on friends and family, make sure everyone around you is doing well, and now you know your vlog. Peace out.